If you don't know who Christopher Ward are, then you're either very new to the watch world or you've just chosen to live under a rock for the last couple of years. In which case, let me enlighten you. Christopher Ward is this affordably priced, no-nonsense brand that has been making waves for a while now in the watch world with watches like the Belcanto and the CW12. I've decided to dive into the brand and try to answer some questions. How do they make watches this apparently cheap? Are they really keeping it as real price-wise and marketing-wise as they position themselves? And are they really as good as so many people say? Let's dive in. Christopher Ward has been around since 2004. They were among one of the very first modern micro brands. They were in some ways much like Vincero and many others in the way that they were one of those cut out the middleman kind of brands that we've been seeing so many of in the last 10 years. For me personally, I started to take notice of them around 2014, 2015. By this time, they, at least as I remember it, were making some interesting things. The key for me at the time was that they marketed that they had made their own in-house movement, the SH21. They weren't quite an homage brand like Steinhardt, but personally I felt that some of their models in terms of design were a bit unremarkable. Having said that, compared to a lot of other brands in the price range, I did feel you were getting a lot of watch for your money. They had better than half decent movements. They didn't just throw out stamped simple cases like Daniel Wellington, but they actually had case designs, real watch specs, and details on dials, cases, and bracelets that were better than what I at least had come to expect from many non-household name brands in this price range. Since then, they've gone from strength to strength with the release of the Belcanto and most recently the 12, which specifically has catapulted Christopher Ward into the limelight and established them quite clearly as not just some random online-only brand, but as a real serious watchmaker. As for myself, I've owned a couple. I had a Trident, a C65, and currently I have a 12 in my collection. How do they make watches this cheap? I don't have access to CW, so I have no insider insights, but I've paid attention to media, interviews done with key figures from the brand, so I think I have directionally at least a good idea, and it all starts with how you make a watch in general. First comes design. Before a watch even gets put into manufacturing, you have the design process. Again, for simplicity, you can design everything from scratch: the case, the dial, the bracelet, the movement. Sticking with everything except the movement, it starts out as an artistic exercise, but at some point it moves to an engineering exercise. A dive case may look cool on paper, but you have to work out how thin you can make it so it can still house the movement, so it can still be water resistant to the depth that you're looking for. The movement is very much the same process. There's initially a lot more engineering that goes into it. Mathematically and engineering-wise, it's not technically hard to put together some springs and gears and get something that will tick. The technology is, after all, half a millennium old by now. The hard part is getting it down to the right size in terms of diameter and height, getting it stable, making it shock resistant, and all that other stuff you need from a modern movement. Second comes prototyping, pre-production, and manufacturing, which has multiple iterations, but the exercise is to figure out if you can actually manufacture the watch that you've drawn. Some of this can be done on a computer with advanced software, but at some point you actually have to make the watch. Depending on the maturity and sophistication of your business, your design and prototyping process also includes some sort of market testing. Running the model by some sort of focus group to figure out how many people might be willing to buy it is important, and it also informs the design process. But back to making the actual watch. This is where you, as a new watchmaker, have a choice to make. What does it mean to make a watch? Some YouTubers online have had their own watch made. They clearly didn't, and that's no criticism, to be clear, they didn't buy a full factory that could machine a case, cut and finish and assemble a bracelet, that could test the movement and assemble the entire product. They reached out to somebody that could do all that for them. Now here's the thing. It's not either or. It's not the case that cheap watches are all made by external suppliers and all other brands are made in-house. Every brand makes the decision when it comes down to the case, the sapphire crystal, the crown, the movement, the bracelet. Every single component is a choice of what do you want to build yourself and what do you want somebody to build for you. It's also a choice of how far you go. You can get the base bracelet sourced from someone else, and then you can do some extra finishing, which is where the term comes from, to finish it, and polishing to make it fit your design specifications. The initial cost of building everything yourself is going to usually be prohibitive to pretty much any startup brand that doesn't have massive backing from investors. Those that go down this route will often be specialty watchmakers making stuff in very small quantities at very high prices, like Roger Smith or Recep Redzepi. Butchered his name, but you know what I mean. Some brands end up being 100% sourced forever. Others start out with some level of full sourcing and transition to moving things in-house when they have the scale and the revenue to justify that level of investment. This is what happened to Rolex when they eventually ended up insourcing more or less everything to have everything under their own control. Buying that special machine and that special tool that can do that one really cool shiny polishing technique is expensive, and you have to figure out if you want that cost baked into your watch. Conversely, sourcing something isn't easy. There are tons of suppliers that can make you a bracelet. But you have to be able to manage that supplier, ensure that you can negotiate the price you want and the corresponding quality. It's ridiculously hard work ensuring that price to quality ratio. At the end of the day, you've figured out what each component is going to cost, either by making it yourself, sourcing it completely, or sourcing something partially and applying the finishing touches yourself. All you need then is to assemble it, test it, and distribute it. Distribution is two things: telling people that you exist, giving people ways of buying your watch. Do you have a store? Do you chase down ADs and try to convince them to stock your product? Do you go fully online? Online is cheap, but it has its drawbacks, because how do people find you? Is something like a watch luxury if you can only get it online? Making yourself known, well, that's marketing. Now, what's the key to Christopher Ward's relatively low cost and high perceived value? 1, they're online only. Not having retail outlets, not having boutiques, not having to have salespeople on staff chasing down ADs and convincing them to stock your goods saves you a ton of money. This definitely drives down overall costs quite considerably. 2, marketing. Christopher Ward does market, let's be clear about that. They may not be Tudor or Rolex, but they are not these holier-than-thou angels that do not stoop to using marketing. Of course they do. Christopher Ward's marketing has been very clever though. Their approach to keeping it real or do your own research, this style of positioning themselves as a high quality value brand that gives you stuff that is just as good as watches sold at 5 times the price, is smart for sure. I do think though that unlike many other online brands, they have done one thing additionally that sets them quite clearly apart. In 2014, they launched their own in-house movement. The bel canto is their own striking chiming type mechanism. They have a modified module in their moonphase. These, I believe, are more marketing than anything else. I was on their website the other day and I had a hard time actually finding a watch in the collection that used the in-house SH21 movement. It dawned on me that the SH21 movement was never about becoming an in-house watch movement maker. It was about getting press, getting attention from the media and the watch community about their watchmaking credentials. This was just like when Omega launches Spirec technology, or Oris launches the Caliber 400, or Rolex launches the Deep Sea Challenge. That SH21 movement gave them huge exposure. Same goes for the bel canto, and same goes for the moonphase. This is marketing through product innovation in a space where you don't often see a lot of technical prowess. I mean, moonphases usually don't sell that well. They're typically in dress watches, and other movements are just more popular. They did that to be taken seriously. Relatively speaking, that investment has been excellent marketing, and I think a lot more intelligent and, in the grander schemes of things, more cost effective than any wildly expensive sponsorship of a football brand or a sports tournament or whatever. 3, they have limited R&D. They have invested their R&D wisely in things that get them exposure. The bel canto, the SH21, but the kind of investments that Rolex puts into, the over-engineered Oysterfix bracelet, or the money that Omega puts into building Spirec technology, or JLC that puts into a chronograph movement that has to fit into a duo-face reverso case, is not something they're doing. Those investments are huge, and CW have been far more strategic about those kind of investments. You're not going to see any kind of cutting-edge technology from them. I wouldn't expect them to, because overall, this approach keeps down their costs. 4, I think Christopher Ward make good watches. They have a site in Switzerland, and I'm certain they have attracted some strong talent. Having said that, I think that one thing that really drives down their costs has nothing to do with watch manufacturing. And this has in large part been confirmed by their founders. I think they are exceptional at procurement, supplier management, and standardization. Procurement. CW admits that not every component that goes into their watches is made by them. I don't know specifically if this bracelet is sourced or the case for a trident is partially manufactured by a third party, but at a production of around 20,000 watches, I have no doubt that they have gotten very good at getting the parts they need in the quality they need and at a cost that they find acceptable. I think CW are really good at understanding what drives up cost and where they can invest in a feature, right down to something like a polished chamfer on a lug that will give a return on investment. As for standardization, look through their catalog and see how many watches are not a variant of a Sellita SW210 or a SW220. Where possible, if they have complications, they have built modules that work on top of the base Sellita modules. Reuse means you can buy in bulk. When you can buy in bulk, you can drive down cost. This combo of procurement skills and standardization in a fairly broad lineup is key. 5. Strategic premium investment. This is partially linked to their procurement skills, but I think they are very well aware of what features are worth doing that boosts sales. So I'm just going to make up some numbers, but just imagine a situation where a ceramic bezel gives you 25% more cost on a bezel, but you're only going to get 1% more sales. Think of an easy adjust bracelet. Again, making up numbers. Let's assume that an easy adjust bracelet gives you 15% more cost, but if it boosts conversions by 20%, then it might be worth it. Enameling as a technique is super expensive to do, and it doesn't appeal to many people bar a few aficionados. So it's not worth it from a revenue generation perspective. I don't think a brand like JLC is anywhere near as good as this. When JLC do enameling, they do take a premium, but I'm not convinced that they've done the same cost-benefit assessment. For them, in that space, it's about showing off. But CW, applied markers, a little bit of chamfering goes a long way to make their watches look and feel premium. A decent bracelet also adds to that premium feel. As for the movement, a Solita with a customized rotor is more than enough. I think they really know where to spend their money on profitable features. Christopher Ward has done an excellent job of positioning themselves as this honest purveyor of good quality watches with good value pricing. They state that they have honest pricing, maximum 3 times the cost of the watch, best guarantee in the business, and Swiss made. Sounds appealing, right? Well, it very much does, and initially it's quite convincing. But let's get it over with and talk about their honest pricing. Maximum 3 times manufacturing cost. According to them, some other brands mark up by 23 times. They're likely not lying, but there's a lot of smoke and mirrors here. A 3 times markup is, according to most watch industry insiders, a relatively restrained markup, but we have to also make clear that the biggest markups are in the highest ends of brands. I don't see Baltic or Yema or Squale marking up their watches 23 times either. So I'm going to say it again. They're not lying, but context and a couple of spoonfuls of salt are recommended. Second, one of the reasons you add more markup on top of the manufacturing cost is because you have to contribute to the cost of distribution channels, stores, ADs, boutiques. CW are online only, so they don't need to do the markup in the same way. They also state that they want to avoid costly celebrity endorsements to which the Swiss brands seem so addicted. This is also a bit disingenuous. 1, they couldn't afford those endorsements if they wanted to, so it was a given that that was never going to happen. 2, if you spend less on marketing, you don't have to mark up as much on top of the manufacturing cost. Since they're not spending a bucket load on marketing, they don't need to put as much of a markup on top of the raw manufacturing cost to cover those marketing costs. Again, those 3 times markup doesn't mean they'll over time not make a huge profit. If they keep their other costs under control, they'll be fine. Then we get to their 60 days of free returns and 60-month guarantee. They make a watch with largely Solita movements. By law, in the EU, you have the right to return anything within 14 days. 60 days is great, but I think the cost-benefit analysis of promising these returns versus the actual number of returns they get is negligible. It's the inverse of a rock and a hard place. If you trust your product, then a 5-year guarantee and 60-day free returns is not a huge risk. So again, good marketing, but not impressive in and of itself. Finally, we get to the last one. Designed in England, made in Switzerland. This is marketing BS of the highest order. I love Swiss watches. The concentration of talent in watchmaking on a global level is centered on 3 sites. Somewhere in Japan, Glashütte, and Switzerland. That is where all the talent is, so the best watchmakers are generally going to be there. Having a site in Switzerland is a business necessity, not a differentiator in any meaningful way. Then, Swiss made is something you take with not a grain or a spoon of salt. We're talking bucket loads of salt, containers of salt. Swiss made means the following. For industrial products, 60% of the manufacturing costs and 50% of the essential manufacturing step must occur in Switzerland. Most often associated with watches or timepieces made in Switzerland, Swiss law considers a watch to be Swiss made if its technical development is carried out in Switzerland, its movement is Swiss, if its movement is cased up in Switzerland, if the final inspection of the watch is conducted by the manufacturer in Switzerland, and at least 60% of the manufacturing costs are incurred in Switzerland. Let's dissect that. 40% can be made completely somewhere else. China, Russia, the Antarctic, no questions asked. Then The remaining 60% of the manufacturing costs have to be incurred in Switzerland. Selita is Swiss, so they're home safe there. Many of their suppliers are likely Swiss, so that's okay. If they get something like a bracelet made in Vietnam for $3 and they use $3.01 worth of finishing, then more of the manufacturing in toto happens in Switzerland. Then all they need to do is case it up and inspect it in Switzerland, which counts to the manufacturing cost. There is a massive amount of leeway in those definitions. This doesn't just go for Christopher Ward, of course, but let's be totally clear. A minimum of 40% of that watch is coming from China, Vietnam, or Malaysia, and likely more with those very loose Swiss-made definitions. In this way, they are no better or worse than any other brand. And then again, maybe even a little bit worse, because they are in so many other metrics trying to say that they are not like the other Swiss brands. But really, they kind of are. CW is, in my opinion, just as heavy on the marketing in many ways as so many others. I would strongly advocate against buying into their whole "we're just this humble, high-value Swiss-made brand" persona that they have created. I would challenge that a 3 times only markup is particularly impressive when taking into account their low costs in terms of marketing, distribution, and their clear skills in the terms of sourcing, procurement, and vendor management. But, here's the thing. When you pull all that marketing back, what do you have? Well, you have the CW12, which is exceptionally well finished. It's an excellent integrated bracelet, and it has a COSC certified movement for under $2,500. You have the Belcanto, which I likely won't ever buy. I think it's a party feature more than a watch I would actually wear, but it is cool that they did it. The C63 Sealander is a 39mm watch with a 45.8mm lug-to-lug and only 11.89-ish millimeters in height. A Seamaster 300 is 13.6 millimeters thick, and it doesn't have a GMT function in the base model. It has applied markers, sunray dial, steel bezel, matte brush case with polished flanks. That's objectively impressive. Comparatively, a Zodiac Super Seawolf costs more, is thicker, and has a SOPROD movement inside. Who cares if they're achieving this by being good at sourcing stuff and making good procurement deals? For me, it makes no difference that Christopher Ward likely have an edge when it comes to sourcing and supplier management, more than they do in terms of classical end-to-end watch production. They put something together that often looks very good, is as reliable as pretty much everything else in the class at a very competitive price. What's not to like? They make great watches. I'm going to keep paying attention to Christopher Ward. Personally, I would like to get my hands on a Moonglow Moonphase watch from them and see what all the fuss is about. If they do a restrained take on a world timer next year, I'm definitely going to sit up and take notice. What about you? What would you like to see from Christopher Ward? Like, subscribe. Cheers.